Thank you very much for joining us today. Welcome to CII's webinar, Resilience, the New Normal in the Engineering and Construction Industry. As I said, I'm Mike Pappas, CII's Associate Director for Deployment, and with us today we have 4 representatives from CII member Deloitte. So Mark Smith, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Mike, thanks so much. And it's Mark Smith. I'm a Managing Director with Deloitte's Infrastructure and Capital Projects practice. And we think we've got a very interesting webinar that we'd like to present to you today. Before we get into the webinar, I do want to just have a shout out to CII for hosting this webinar, but really not only this webinar, but really all the webinars we've had so far. I think they've all been fantastically productive, great information. And we're hoping today's webinar will be similar with some very good information for not only the member companies, but all the people who are on the in the audience to hear about some of our thoughts and observations. Just a quick note, Deloitte has been a member of CII for the last 3 years. And it's been a fantastic experience for us. We've used so much of the research and our everyday analysis and advisory work that we do for all of our clients. So it's been very, very valuable for us. As some of you may know, I've actually been involved with CII since its inception. My PhD advisor was Dr. Richard Tucker, and actually when CII got started, I was one of the principal researchers on the very first study that was chaired by General Carroll Dunn. So I think I speak from some long experience that when I say that CII is really the preeminent construction research and learning institution really throughout the globe. I think that's really a very true statement. As I mentioned, I'm with Deloitte's Infrastructure and Capital Projects practice, and just a quick introduction there. It's a very specialized group within Deloitte. We have about 5,000 professionals who are really strategically positioned throughout the globe, and our client base is really across all the stakeholders. It includes owners, it includes EPC contractors, it includes suppliers. And we really focus on most of the major commercial industries, as well as a very strong focus within the public sector space. If you look at our practice, we have essentially 3 tenets that we kind of lead by. Our first tenet really is how we help our clients kind of maximize their value in investments in infrastructure and capital assets. Our second tenet is how do we help transform companies or even public entities to really successfully deliver on mega projects and to do that with confidence. And our third tenet is really to be an enabler of new technology and digital technology to make projects more efficient and really to have results then that really matter. So that's a little bit of a blurb just on Deloitte's Infrastructure and Capital Projects practice. Our webinar today, in terms of resilience, the new normal within the E&C industry, is not specifically about COVID-19, because I think what you're going to hear from our panel that's coming up is, I think, a fairly optimistic viewpoint around what we're seeing within the industry as it relates to market-changing events like COVID-19 and how companies are responding to that successfully. What we're going to do is really go through what we have seen over the last 100 days, really the lockdown, and in some places the lockdown has been more severe than others. We also know that some industries, such as like the consumable manufacturing and life sciences industry, is going gangbusters. They've got more capital projects going on now than ever before. And we also know on the flip side that other industries like oil and gas has taken a temporary nosedive, and they've also had to respond in terms of what the changes might mean. So we're going to try to give you some of our observations through the various clients that we've worked with over the last 100 days, and try to present, as I said before, kind of an optimistic viewpoint of how to manage the change, how to be more resilient, and what successful companies are doing in that respect. And so we want to do that really in 3 segments within this webinar. The first one will be just short term. What's happened over the last 100 days? What does it mean to the industry? How have companies responded very quickly? As anybody that's been in this industry, the industry is known for changing. Sometimes it takes years, many times it takes decades. But this last 100 days has shown companies have to change not only within a few weeks, but sometimes even just in a few days. So we're going to go through a short-term perspective of what we've seen. Then we're going to move into more what we call more of a midterm. What are we seeing companies now trying to embrace around digital and data technology, and how is that making companies more efficient? And then finally, we're going to do a long-term view. Again, our viewpoints on really what's going to change permanently within the industry, and some of the things that you should take away from this as you're looking to the future over the next 5, 10, 15 years. I'm joined with a fantastic panel of colleagues from our Deloitte and Infrastructure Capital Projects practice. Mike Whalen's a managing director in our Houston office. Mike leads our energy and oil and gas practice, and he's going to be speaking about the short term. After Mike, we'll have Ryan Uren, who's our manager in our Pittsburgh office. He's also involved with our energy and resources industry practice, and he'll be responding to a little bit about the midterm viewpoint. And finally, we've got Jody Kim. Jody's going to be talking about the long term. Jody's a manager in our Washington, D.C. office, and is focused on our public sector client base. Jody also has the distinction of being our Deloitte coordinator with all of our CII activities that are going on, whether it's through task forces, research studies. So she's kind of has a double duty job, and we appreciate all of her efforts in making sure we're connected with CII. So without further ado, let me turn it over to Mike, and Mike Whalen will talk about some of the short-term challenges and industry outlook. Mike, take it away.
Mark, thank you very much. Could we advance the slide? Okay, there we go. So before I begin, I just want to take a minute and recognize everyone on the webinar and everybody that's connected with this industry. And again, like Mark said, give you all a shout out for what everybody in this industry is doing to keep this country's infrastructure, critical infrastructure, maintained and progressing during these challenging times. So give your colleagues a virtual high five and give you all a pat on your back. You deserve it. And it's very, very much appreciated by everybody out there. So let's get started here. So this industry proves time and time again, when there's a crisis, it proves its resiliency. And as the old saying goes, that I'm always reminded of when crisis strikes, that necessity is the mother of invention. And what this industry does is when there's something difficult to do, it finds a way to do it. And what we've tried to do here is capture some of what we're seeing out there, and we'll walk through some of the examples throughout this deck. What we're also seeing, though, is these crises tend to drive more collaboration between the entire ecosystem. Not in all cases, but in most cases. They also tend to drive technology implementation and the adoption, which I think everybody could agree is needed in the industry. So let me just walk through quickly some examples on this slide. I'm not going to read the slide verbatim, but again, I think it goes to the saying that necessity is the mother of invention, and owner companies, contractor companies, engineering companies have found a way to keep their workers safe. Again, that is the primary tenet of companies that operate in this space. And they're doing that by wearable tags that ping social distancing. They also are conducting regular temperature checks and virtual and remote work. There's probably a page to be taken from some of the mining clients that have been doing remote ops for a while, and we're seeing adoption of that as well. And again, we're seeing some really cool stuff within some of the owners and EPC companies reassessing how they actually do their risk assessments in light of this this COVID crisis we're facing. So with that, let me ask to advance the slide. I think we've got a polling question up next. Let me just wait for it to populate here. So this kind of ties to a technology question. And the question is, you can read it for yourself, but how is your organization currently managing document controls? And you all can read the responses yourselves, but take a minute and submit your response if you would. And then I think Mike Pappas will show the results of the poll. So let's see, as you can see, 57% cloud-based, 31% people managing cybersecurity, 36 digital structure, and then no documentation, good, only 4%. So with that, let me turn it over to Ryan, and Ryan will take you through his section.
All right, good. Just want to say thank you to the CII, everyone in attendance, and I think I can speak for everyone here and on our team. We're excited and just happy to take part in this webinar today. Continuing on what Mike had started speaking regarding the resiliency of E&C organizations, especially in digital technologies. So we have 4 main areas on this slide. I'm not going to speak on all of them, but I want to highlight 2 specific ones that are key implementations that are ongoing that really help to minimize and mitigate a lot of challenges that are being faced presently. The first one is the use of drones. And in the last 10 years, the E&C industry has really embraced the drone technology. You know, couple key points of drones is the off-site surveillance that it allows, which is the key point when you're not able to fully return to work with your full staff. It has a very good potential to do construction inspection, to provide really and I'm using a cliche, but truly a bird's eye view of especially larger projects taking up much larger footprints in a way that it would not be possible for a typical worker on site or even someone on the management team on a large project. And with its ability it enabled to see much of the project and capture a large amount of data and provide very frequent updates and real-time data, it allows for the potential to reduce your on-site labor with your indirect costs and also your overhead costs. A second area I wanted to focus on is that third column, the digital building twins. And the other items, the 5D BIM, the AR and VR, all throughout your project lifecycle, a lot of those are held very closely together. They complement one another. With the digital twin, it is essentially your design model for your project. Very early on in the early planning stages, all throughout the execution and through turnover and handover to the owner at commissioning and startup. You know, this allows for a lot of early planning and collaboration with your key stakeholders. Of course, the owner, contractors, vendors, and to allow someone that a lot of times is not part of or isn't at the table at the beginning, your operator, your ops team, it gives them an opportunity to take a look at a lot of the proposed locations of key pieces and parts of equipment, instrumentation, valves, things they may need to utilize, whether it's for maintenance, for their day-to-day operations. They really get a buy-in early on, and it helps eliminate a lot of potential conflicts and late game changes to a project. And another thing it allows for is it helps on your planning and your forecasting and even your constructability issues you're available to identify and see potential conflicts and issues with coordination. Let me go to the next slide. And we have a second poll question. So how do you track and plan project resources? and we're emphasizing people and labor. So wait a few moments here for the collection of the answers, and then we'll report the results. Okay, poll is closed. So we see 65% of the attendees answered that the project manager or resource planning, let me see the results here. Oh, resource planning software. 56% actually use Excel, SharePoint, or Outlook or something similar, and then 35% as a other type of software, and then even a larger percentage than I anticipated of 27% using manual matters. It's quite an interesting mix. So continuing on, moving further into some other digital technologies and how these strategies are allowing us to adapt and move forward and progress with these continuing challenges. So a couple, we have a bunch of different items on this screen, and you know, they're all important in their own way. The couple that I like to focus on are the remote monitoring, excuse me, and the live markups. Again, the remote monitoring is it kind of coincides with your use of drones. It's also the cloud software. It also is a good benefit of this is it allows for personnel off-site, you know, not on-site or say in a field trailer at the job site, to identify progress achieved, upcoming activities, key long-term milestones, things along the planning and scheduling parts of the project. It's also used to assist in your planning of day-to-day activities, and as well as helping in verifying from an owner side, or as also submitting from a contractor or vendor side their pay applications to determine, you know, the percentage of work complete on a monthly pay application. So it's become a very valuable tool that's been enabled personnel and people in our E&C industry to be able to do a lot of the project controls work and not necessarily have to be directly on the project site. The second area I'd like to highlight is the live markups. So with the advance of the technology, especially the digital twin and in essence a lot of your newer software, using a tablet, going out to the job site, and personnel they're able to live time go and mark up areas they identify of key areas of identification where there could be an issue. They tag on their notebook, something that's incomplete, an issue with, say, quality, potential future risks. These items are live time, uploaded to that model, to the cloud on the fly, and with the right software, you're able to impact or send that information to the proper personnel and stakeholders to quickly identify, and they can address and correct this issue at hand. So it allows for a very quick turnaround on issues identified. It really reduces your timing to for walk downs, for punch list items, for things all along those lines of quality and work that is has to be completed or addressed as things are identified in the field. So it's a much quicker means of identifying and then also impacting and putting in your as-built of your model what's actually in place. So a secondary item to both of those and to these items shown on the screen are on the right-hand side, where it allows you to really look at your risk management incidents and minimize those. And it has a good opportunity, or allows for an opportunity, excuse me, for your insurance costs to be reduced by limiting your exposure and your risks that you encounter in the field by one's ability to not be in the field and work remotely. So I believe there's another question. Poll question number 3. Question is, how comprehensive are contractor scopes that are developed for your construction projects? So wait a few minutes to get the answers in, and then we'll discuss the responses. Okay, poll's closed. Thank you, Mike. So looking at the results here, we have answers all across the board. All the high percentage of 39% for very detailed, comprehensive. 27 for detail, but not for as much coordination, all the way down to a 12% very granular, coordinated within modeling software. So it looks like you're going to see things all across the board, and I think it's dependent upon the project, the level of design or the level of work completed when a scope is developed, and probably on a level of the timing and how quick or how fast track the project and the schedule is. So it really depends on each individual project, but that's great information. Thank you. Oh, and we have one more poll question. Question is, how does your organization currently manage project schedules? Okay, poll's closed. I kind of anticipated this, and it's near and dear into my heart, the use of P6 for the most part, and project to a lesser extent. So 80% answered with the installed software of your Microsoft project or your Primavera. So that's good information. Thanks again, everyone. Okay, so for my final slide today, wanted to focus on the use of modularization and prefabrication and how that's been used. Specifically, it's been emphasized, and I believe oil and gas has been the front runner, that sector for quite a long time, but it's being adopted more and more by construction sectors. I mean, all across various construction sectors, not just oil and gas. So, you know, a couple key points and advantages, and many of them are on this slide, but a couple I wanted to highlight. And these are really reasons that this has become much more prevalent, not just in oil and gas, but in other sectors. So the first big item is parallel work streams are able to occur. Essentially, work is ongoing at your project site. While that work is ongoing, the work packages in your modularization plan is able to be constructed and built off-site concurrently while the work on-site is occurring. So you're essentially doing two things at once that you typically would not be able to, and it really shortens your duration for the overall project. And the second big item, and this is emphasized when executed properly with adequate planning and with the proper preparation, it really allows for three key areas. Your schedule is going to improve, and that goes in line with the parallel work streams. The second area is it really allows an opportunity for you to increase productivity. You have a dedicated labor force at your yard performing the modular work, and that work is being performed without those external disruptions one typically sees on a construction site. A couple examples would be outages, interferences with other activities and crews that work in areas near or close by to where your crew or your team is working. Or if you have areas of critical lifts and areas that are shut down temporarily for materials moving in and out. And wanted to just speak on the prefabrication aspect of this. It's similar to modularization, but the one key difference with prefabricated work is you have that ability of working in a controlled environment where you don't have to worry about the weather conditions. You've got also the temperature, ambient air temperature in a climate controlled environment. So it really helps you to continue to work, be productive, and not be impacted by a lot of those things that you encounter on a typical job site. So with that, I'm going to turn things over to Jody.
Thank you, Ryan. Hi, everyone. It's great to talk with you today. To round out our conversation, I would like to lead us through some thinking around the longer-term resilience in front of us. Times of crisis or major disruption cause each of us to buckle down and seek stability. But once that storm has blown over, there really are tremendous occasions for improving and growing because of these times, not just in spite of them. So I'll talk through three major themes of what we're seeing. And within each, I'll propose a specific opportunity for you to consider as a takeaway, something that you might be able to apply to your own company or a role in your business. But first, let's talk about labor. We can think about this in two ways. There's traditional labor, everything from the craft field labor to professional. And secondly, in terms of the future of work. Traditionally speaking, labor shortages have always been an issue for the construction industry, it seems. That's nothing new. With unemployment at an all-time high, many people are looking for work. It's interesting that many don't default to considering our industry. I think there's an opportunity for us to evaluate why that is and to create some creative hiring practices and training programs to tap into that pool of people, specifically in those technical trades. Regarding the future of work, it's really about reevaluating how work is being done and what skills are being used to do it. Ryan just mentioned how oil and gas has really hedged a lot of the labor risks by using the modularization as well as it has. I think other industries can definitely learn a lot from oil and gas. Interestingly, construction industry spends less money on technology than all other industries, even agriculture. That's still shocking to me. And it's really the companies that are getting ahead that are adopting these technologies for efficiency and for better use of the people that they have. So the opportunity that I would challenge everyone with today is thinking about what untraditional skill sets would actually propel your company forward. What could a software developer do with your disjointed project control systems? Or what could some data analytics shed light on to improve the value that you get from the KPIs that you use? Secondly, let's transition and talk about mergers and acquisitions. When we talk about M&A, we typically think of formal business transactions, buying up, selling off, restructuring. This is quite common in waves of the aftermath when markets have been disrupted as they have. This could be an opportune time to acquire a specific service line that you've been considering. But for those that aren't in the position to be making those types of corporate decisions, I would really suggest that we think about this in terms of partnerships. On any given project, many issues arise because of the relationships between the owners, the contractors, the suppliers. CII has done a lot of research on this, really asking, are these collaborative, are they transactional, or even adversarial? The opportunity here is how can you create long-term value through these partnerships? I'd encourage you to take a look at your contracting incentives and your go-to-market strategies, especially in light of the newer priorities of this season. This kind of thinking could not only build your present resilience, but also get you ahead in the long run as everyone else is sorting out this season. Thirdly, let's talk about reducing costs. Most people are looking to tighten the belt these days and just try to remain profitable. For the longer term, though, how can you make adjustments now to actually increase those savings in the future? I'll briefly shed light on 3 examples. First of all, if you're in a position to move projects forward, financing is really cheap these days. There's really just opportunities right there to take advantage of. Secondly, overhead costs. A big one that we're seeing being evaluated these days is office space. With so many people working remotely, a lot of companies have noticed similar productivity in their staff and are considering what it might look like in a sustainable fashion moving forward. And part of that is evaluating their office footprints and thinking how they might shrink that or reallocate to lower the overhead costs that they're incurring as a business. Third example I'll mention is around commodities. Mike mentioned how oil and gas has taken a big hit recently, and one result of that is transportation costs are noticeably cheaper. So several companies are really looking into how they can take advantage of that in the meantime while continuing their business and growing it at the same time. So the opportunity here is really it's time to check and adjust the frequently said phrase around this is the way things have always been done. It's a lot of the rules of the road are changing these days, and we're seeing those that are taking the time to evaluate different factors such as these, really finding ways to position themselves to save cost for the long run and not just in the immediate phase of the season that we're in. So if we can move to the next slide, I will conclude us by just summarizing some of the main points that we've addressed. We've talked about themes of the workforce and technology, cost, all in terms of how do we be resilient in the short term and the longer terms. You know, most of us, I think, have weathered that initial disruption of this year, and it's an opportune time to really think about how you can make some smart decisions and propel your business forward. I've heard it said before that life is 10% what happens to you and 90% how you respond to it. And you know, while completely respecting the hardships of this season that have impacted so many of us, we are particularly excited about the positive disruption that is happening to our industry right now, and specifically in the vein of technology and the other examples that my colleagues and I have shared. So we hope that you all are inspired by some of the talking points that we've shared with you today, and hope that you can find ways to build your resilience for the long run. And with that, we will transition back to Mark for some Q&A.
Jody and all the presenters, thank you very much. It was very informative. If you have questions, please either use your chat box and we'll respond to those questions. We have about 15 minutes or so left in the webinar. There were some questions that people have been asking me, and I thought I would ask our panel first. Maybe Mike Whalen, if you'll come up on screen, and Ryan, why don't you pop your camera up as well. That's what's great about being the moderator. I don't have to answer the questions, but I get to pose the hard questions. But Mike, I think you've been involved with the oil and gas industry now for many, many years. It's probably been the hardest hit industry, not only before COVID-19, but it was hit hard before that, and now it's got the double whammy. What do you think are the top 2 or 3 things that companies should be doing now, whether they're in shutdown mode or maybe they're slowed down, to really come out of it when they have to with a bang? What are you seeing out there with some of the companies that you're working with, either on the owner side or on the EPC or supplier side, that you think are some best practices?
Yeah, thanks, Mark. So, I mean, to your point, you know, we don't have to go through all the commodity price fall and then the double whammy like COVID, like you just talked about. But you know, there's huge initiatives obviously underway around cost takeout and how do you do more with less. I think every single company, both on the owner and the EPC side, are laser focused on doing more with less, and then how do you sustain that through these rough times? And you know, there's a lot of levers that are being pulled right now around that. But again, I probably would just summarize it like that. You know, in this environment, every single dollar counts, and to these companies' credit, both on the owner, the contractor, the engineering, the subcontractor, the focus is optimization and capital efficiency.
Great, Mike. The next question for Ryan.
Thanks, Mark. So I would say the use of these digital technologies is going to be dependent. I think it's dependent on each individual project. So the mega projects, they have a greater ability to absorb what incidental costs will come with these technologies. And in addition, it being a larger project, a larger scope of work, they're also able to realize some of the real-time savings you can see on implementing these uses of digital technology. And again, I think it's really dependent on the size of the project and each individual, owner, client, EPC, whether or not they want to implement something, because there is an element of risk, of course, when you add let's call it what it is, an additional scope item to your work. It's going to provide definitely some items that provide a return that help your project, but it really, again, it's project dependent, and I think each individual project is going to make its own decision whether or not to use any of these digital technologies. So, I mean, that's the reason why a company would not use it. I think they're concerned with bottom line, with every dollar that's spent, as Mike stated, and that's still it's even more true today than it ever has been.
Ryan, just a follow-up question that came from one of the audience members is, what do you see in terms of technology or innovation that's going to have the most impact on efficiencies over the next several years?
Let's see. So I think the next, I don't think this has been implemented as much as I had anticipated it, but the VR, virtual reality, and the use of that with your digital twin and your 3D, 4D model, that to me, I think is going to be implemented more. Reason I say that is it is, again, it's going to be simplistic, this explanation, but you basically you envelop yourself when you put on those 3D or the VR goggles, and you are able to see and truly envision. And this isn't just limited to, say, an oil and gas or a industrial type project, but this could be done for a commercial building, especially in healthcare, all across various sectors. And it really gives not only the owner, which is very important, that they get what they expect and they understand truly what's going into their costs and their outcome with their scope of work, but also the contractor and the designers and the engineers, all being able to have a true understanding and truly visualizing. I mean, you actually see the picture instead of having to sometimes imagine it, of what your outcome's going to be. So I think that's going to take a hold a little more. And the other reason, not only is it allows everyone to visualize what they're going to be getting as their outcome, it also allows you, as I spoke earlier, a lot of the upfront coordination as well. And that's a big key, is getting everyone, all your stakeholders on your whole project lifecycle, understanding and as best you can, because to agree and to understand, okay, this is what we're getting, and that's an acceptable outcome. So I think those are the things that we would look out for in the near future.
Mark, if I may, just it's not necessarily technology related, and Ryan, thanks for your response. But what we're seeing also in this environment, like previous crises, is not, again, not in all cases, but in many cases, the silos within companies start to break down, and the tension between owner, EPC, owner, contractor tend to dissolve. Again, not in all cases, but in many cases. So the ways of working tend to improve. The collaboration increases, again, because I think it goes back to this whole point about resiliency. If it's imperative to get something done, that ecosystem in this industry finds a way to get it done. Now, unfortunately, as we've seen, when the crises tend to pass, old habits come back, and we kind of start the churn again. So hopefully this time will be different, and the ways of working that we're seeing on some of these mega projects, much more collaborative, will take hold. So anyway, just wanted to add that.
Thanks, Mike. Jody, a question for you. Ryan talked about some of the new data and digital technology out there, but what do you kind of advise companies now that are looking for new skill sets to bring into their companies, maybe from an E&C perspective? What kind of skill sets should they be looking at during not only this time, but maybe over the next 5 to 10 years?
Yeah, thank you, Mark. I would say it's a variety, but the really popular ones that I'm often talking with clients about are around software development and data analytics. Those are big buzzwords these days, but there's really some merit there. We are sitting on a lot of data, even to the degree of technology use that we as an industry have right now, which is relatively limited. We have so much data, all of the project information, all of the metrics. And it's rare that we're really looking through that and evaluating what is this telling us. Now, how can we look backward to understand it, and then how can we look forward to forecast and make better decisions and even avoid the potential pitfalls. So I think in that the data analytics realm and in the software development, especially, a common conversation that I'm having is I've got all of these different softwares that do different things within my company, and they don't talk to each other. And that hits on some of the silos that Mike was just mentioning. And so I think if we, so there are some off-the-shelf options that help alleviate this. Other companies would prefer to keep using some of the packages that they already have, but there are ways to layer in some software solutions to create that talking nature and break down the silos and help everyone make more data-driven decisions instead of whoever's pounding the table the loudest or whatever the most recent fire is that we're responding to.
Thank you, Jody. Mike, a number of questions have come in through the chat line, and maybe this is a good one for you, or any of the panel members can chime in. But in the past, we've always seen on projects where there's probably an equal balance between schedule and cost, and trying to monitor and manage both of those. But are we seeing now where cost is becoming the primary driver, and especially around cost reduction, and maybe schedule is taking a little bit of a back seat? Any observations from Mike, from you, or maybe either Ryan or Jody on that type of question that's coming in from a number of people?
Well, let me go first because I don't want to be embarrassed by my smarter colleagues here. I think it's industry specific. So if you're in an industry facing really difficult commodity pressures, if you haven't pivoted to a cost-focused project, and everybody that plays in this industry does that. Now, if you're in another industry, high tech being one of them, where there's huge demand on data centers, cloud services, the quicker they get those things up and running, the better. So it all depends on the economics, kind of the macroeconomic of the industry in which you're delivering capital projects, I guess is how I would summarize it.
Yeah, I'll just add to that, Mike. I completely agree. I've seen some significant pressures on schedule, and this is from before COVID and even present, and specifically around just the predictability. The challenge that our industry faces to accurately plan out and execute according to that plan. I mean, there are always changes for different reasons, and that really, it drives up cost, but it also makes it hard to plan and predict the rest of the mission around what that capital asset is intending to serve. So just an example, like there are certain clients that I work with that have different components of the capital asset, whether in the data centers, those large pieces of equipment, and there are long lead times on those to store them. If you get them early, it's very expensive. You can't get them into the building too early because of weather conditions. You can't get it in too late sometimes because of size. And so the timing is really a sensitivity for a lot of people I work with. And that's why, I'll just reiterate some things that Ryan was mentioning around modularization and prefab. That's really a way to control your schedule risk a little bit more.
Maybe another question that's kind of related to this around cost control, cost reduction. What's the panel believe? What are they seeing in terms of contract types? I think it might be industry specific, but in the past we obviously saw probably a majority of the projects being cost plus, guaranteed maximum price contracts versus lump sum. Do we potentially see now maybe a switch as we come out of COVID-19 and looking over the next couple of years, where companies might want to start to go more lump sum, fixed price, so they have a real handle on the cost? What's the panel members' take on that?
So,
Yeah, I'll go ahead,
okay,
Ryan. Go ahead.
okay, thanks, Mike. I'll take a stab at this one. So, I think it's I would say is industry dependent, projects dependent as well. Um, what I think we're going to start seeing is, they may companies and organizations may slow down the progression of a project to ensure that the design and the upfront planning is more thoroughly vetted and complete, and it may lean more, obviously with a better defined scope, opportunity for a lump sum cost. It makes a lot more sense. And with that being said, the organizations are probably going to want a little more cost certainty as well, because and now more than ever with the events that have unfolded and continue to unfold in many industries, that I believe that's what's going to be happening a little more, is maybe a wait and see or a double and triple check before proceeding and issuing an FID on a large project.
I guess the only thing I would add, and Ryan, I agree with everything you said. The only thing I would add, some companies are really, really good at aligning their contracting strategy and their compensation frameworks that underpin that strategy with the project objectives. And some companies, it's just it's embedded in the way they plan and execute their projects. What we've seen, again, it's industry dependent, like Ryan alluded to, but a more thoughtful approach now than maybe in the past as to aligning those contract types with your delivery strategies and project objectives. So um, I would say the easy way to say that it depends on the company, the project participants, who's best to take on that price risk or cost risk at any given time in the project. So there's a ton of stuff that goes into these, and I think CII has done a really nice job in some of that contracting strategy analytics. So again, it depends, but there's a thoughtful way to do it, and a lot of companies are adopting that.
Mhm.
Ryan, we had a number of questions come in on new technology. What do you see, again, we throw the term out there a lot now, AI, artificial intelligence. What do you see as probably the number one AI tool or technique that's now being used within the industry?
That's a tough one. Um,
And many of the questions were around that we're really not using AI. So, maybe you could factor that into your response.
well, sure, on both those. So Jody made an excellent point earlier about, how our industry is one of the last. I think we always seem to be very old school. We don't embrace the technology as quickly as others. We don't spend as much money on technology as other industries. But I would say, and the couple instances I have seen AI, it's been on relatively, I would say, easy to predict items that we, and again, I think the construction industry is very, it's almost a very industry where it's tough to just instantly trust something is going to work when you've done something the same way for many years. So the one instance I believe it has been used is there's a specific artificial intelligence that is able to tell you if a slab pour is level and adequate per the specifications. And it's if you imagine like those automated vacuum cleaners in your home, it's something like that, although much different and much more advanced, that tells you and ensures if you're pouring slab on deck for a multi-story building, it lets you know you're at the correct LL you need to have and meet the specifications. So I know that's the one that's being implemented now. It's hard to say where it'll go in the future, and with our industry, it's like I said, it's like it's a trust but verify, I guess. So I think people need to see it with their own eyes, and then I think we'd adopt it a little bit easier once it's seen and known, and it gets a little bit of word of mouth around a little better.
And Ryan, just I guess as a plug for the audience, down at the bottom of the slide, you'll see a website that you can take down the web information in terms of receiving future access to metrics and recommendations around the adoption of new technologies within the industry. You can go to the website that's listed at the bottom of the slides. Mike Pappas, I think we're almost to the top of the hour. For the audience, I know there's a lot of questions that have come in and we didn't answer all of them. We do have a list of the questions, and we're going to try to continue to answer those even after the webinar is finished. But just from the moderator standpoint, I want to say really appreciate you joining in. This is a very, very important topic, as I mentioned at the outset. Many of our observations have been based upon the last 100 days and the feedback that we're getting from owners, EPC contractors, suppliers, really all the stakeholders in big projects is really what has formed a lot of the opinions that we've tried to present today. And it really performs kind of the advice that we try to give companies kind of going in, thinking about the future over the next 5, 10, 15 years. So for maybe even people who are in the audience, we may have picked your brain a little bit to come up with some of these ideas. And so we want to, again, give a shout out, as Mike Whalen mentioned at the beginning. This industry is very resilient. There's a lot of good things to come out of this hectic times we've been in, and very confident that we will have some very, very successful stories coming out of it. So with that, Mike Pappas, I'll turn it back to you to close out the webinar.
All right, thank you, Mark, and thank you to your team very much for your work behind putting this together and doing a successful webinar. So thank you all very much in the audience for joining us. We appreciate your time, and we hope you enjoyed the webinar. Don't forget to check out our events page to sign up for future webinars. Stay safe, and we'll see you next time. Thanks.